Hello everyone, my name is Leonie and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to discuss all the wonderful, honestly really wonderful books that I have recently been reading, and I'm gonna do it a little bit differently than I usually do, because usually I see the books that I read as a hobby as just like these singular things, like just singular books that I talk about on my channel as if they are just solitary objects. But recently I've been really noticing that that is not really the case. You know, you read one book, it makes you think of something, and then you pick up another book on like the same topic. Just for fun, I decided to kind of map the books that I've been reading since the beginning of the year as if they are like trees. As if they are trees that start with one book and then grow out into this big tree, like branching out, like one book leads to another similar book, which then leads to another similar book. And I wanted to share my book trees with you. I just wanted to give you a little insight into, I guess, the kind of curiosity-based mindset that I have when it comes to reading, and show you how all of these books that I recently read are not just like solitary random books, they're all connected to each other in some way. Let's start with a tree that sprouted as a book on figure skating and somehow led me to read a manifesto on how to create a utopian future of nature. All right, you see what I mean? This is the fun stuff. Let's start with the bottom of this tree. I was at my friend's house and there was this book laying on a table that immediately made me realize, like, oh, you just finished that book. So I was like, hey, what is that book like? Did you like it? And she immediately just, you could see her turn on and be like, this book was so amazing, like, you should read it. It's about figure skating, it's about romance, it's about doomed love and ambition. And me, having just finished Heated Rivalry, I was like, you know what? That sounds like it's somehow going to fill that void in my mind. And so I picked up this book called The Favorites. It's nothing similar to Heated Rivalry. I definitely went into that with the wrong expectations, but that did not take away from the fact that this was awesome. It had been a while that I had this feeling of like, I can't stop reading. I want to keep reading. Not because the book was particularly good, but it was definitely good at keeping me on the edge of my seat. It is about Kathy, who's a figure skater, an ice dancer, and she dances with her boyfriend Heath. They come from a poor background. It's a pretty abysmal situation in their household, but through all the setbacks, they are training really hard to get to the Olympics. There is competition with like another group of ice dancers, another pair. There is relationships that are getting broken up, and then different pairs that then pair up again, you know, like cross-pairing with each other. There is gossip from the other ice dancers, gossip from the managers and the coaches. It's a shit show. And it was awesome. I also realized that this is actually a Wuthering Heights retelling. Nobody really talks about this. It's not really marketed as such, but it very clearly is. I mean, the main character is called Kathy. Her partner is called Heath. They have a rivalry with this other pair called Garrett and Bella, who are clearly Isabella and Edgar Linton. It follows kind of the plot structure of Wuthering Heights, but just like most Wuthering Heights retelling, if you've seen my video essay on it, it does kind of like end with like a love story happy ending, and they also refuse to kill Kathy, as they usually do in these retellings. The best way that I can describe The Favorites is Taylor Jenkins Reid meets Colleen Hoover. In the sense that it has this Taylor Jenkins Reid vibe, where you also follow the documentary that is being made about these ice dancers. It is drama, it is, you know, about sports celebrities. It has that Taylor Jenkins Reid vibe, but it's not as well written, and sometimes it just gets a little too dramatic to the point that it's starting to veer into Colleen Hoover territory. But despite that, I think I ended up giving it 4 stars. If you are in the mood for just something dramatic, sports competition love story, look no further than this book. And she's actually currently writing a book that is between two female ice dancers, and I hope that that is going to be my heated rivalry. Anyway, this book then sparked an intense interest in ice dancing. This was leading up to the Olympic Winter Games, so I watched like a documentary, Glitter and Gold, about like the top ice dancers of the Winter Olympics. I of course watched Alyssa Liu, which is not ice dancing, that's ice skating. Got really obsessed with how joyful Alyssa Liu was, and then watching her kind of reignited an interest for me in reading books and stories and ideas about creating joy and having joy, especially as a woman. So this then led me to pick up the book Women Living Deliciously by Florence Given. This is a self-help / cultural commentary book about how to find joy in your life, specifically as a woman. It criticizes all the ways in which people, but especially women, have their joy taken away from them. You know, we're not supposed to like ourselves. We're not supposed to like the way we look. We're not supposed to like our bodies. We're always supposed to shrink and make ourselves small and people please and not be too out there or too successful, but mostly be in service of other people's joy. And this is a book about how to, well, live deliciously instead of living exhaustedly. When I started reading this, I was very, very excited about this. It was kind of exactly everything that I've been trying to work on myself for a while, and that is, you know, learning to listen to what you actually want instead of listening to what you think you should do or what you think you should want. Learning to say no more, but also she goes into like things that I also find interesting, like the concept of awe and how experiencing a feeling of awe has such a positive influence on our mental health. She goes into how our phones and how patriarchy and sexism robs us of so much authentic joy. She talks about solo dating and like having fun by yourself. She gives tips on how to honor your creativity and express yourself. She criticizes girl boss feminism and this idea that as a woman you need to be doing everything yourself and be hyper independent. All kinds of topics that I'm also super interested in. So when I first read like the first quarter of this book, I was like, this is amazing. But then as I kept on reading, my interest kind of fizzled away because I felt like she kind of kept repeating herself and repeating her ideas without going down further. And I've been thinking about what exactly it was about this book that made me feel like it kept a little bit at the surface. But when she does talk about a lot of things that I also needed to hear. She cites other essays, she cites research, and I've come to the conclusion that the problem with this book is that it's not fully a personal essay, but it's also not fully a cultural criticism. Women Living Deliciously is very focused on the experience of the author, Florence Given, which is not a problem. You know, she gives her personal anecdotes. She gives tips that worked for her personally. She talks about how she personally tries to live deliciously and honor her own joy. Sometimes she gives us little snippets of personal stories about her burnout, about toxic relationships that she's been in, but she never really talks about it. They're kind of like passing mentions, but to me, this book really shone the most when she would tell us a personal story. But most of this book, she actually keeps the reader a little bit at arm's length. She doesn't fully really go into her own story. She doesn't give us a really in-depth personal essay. You know, it remains focused on you, you know, as a self-help book. And that's fine. I think women are maybe sometimes too much expected to always write personal essays and talk about themselves in order to be taken seriously. So it's totally fine if she didn't want to write a personal book. But then at the same time, it remains within the realm of Florence Given's own experiences. Women Living Deliciously is not like a cultural examination of joy. We don't really get to see other examples of other people and how they bring joy into their lives. Like, I think there was a great opportunity here for this to turn into a book to share examples from history, women from across cultures, just examples from other women, but it remains just focused on Florence Given, which again is fine if this were to be more of a personal essay kind of book, but it's also not that. So it kind of remains in this little limbo where it's kind of just about Florence Given, but she also keeps you at arm's length. And I think because of that, the entire book constantly feels slightly on the surface. Like there's this depth below it that she's not ready to go to. And I would love to see that from her. Also, I read the reviews for this book, and most of the negative reviews of this book are like, I knew this when I was 12. Like, this is not new information. Which kind of made me think like, oh, well, to me, a lot of this was actually new information. So I don't know what that says about me, but I think the thing with self-help books especially is that everyone is on a different part of their journey. Yeah, for some people, when they were 12, they already learned to, you know, choose themselves and choose what they wanted for themselves. But for other people, that is something they struggle with their entire life. So just to help you, if you are someone who currently struggles with like constantly having a little voice in your head that tells you, don't do that because what are people going to think of you? Don't do that because that's not the right thing to do. You should be doing something else. If you have a little voice in your head that's constantly criticizing you and telling you to, well, not express yourself even if you want to, then I think this book is for you. There's a pigeon staring at me. Hello? Are you looking for a little bird bath? It's not filled right now because it hasn't rained in a while. Sorry, man, no bird bath for you. The birds love the bird bath on my balcony. So then, moving on, our tree is kind of branching off. Reading Women Living Deliciously actually got me to reread one of my favorite essays by Audre Lorde, which is The Erotics of Power, Uses of the Erotic, which is kind of about the same concept. And that is that, especially as women or any kind of marginalized person, you need to get in contact with your own desires and what you want. She calls it erotics, but it's not necessarily a sexual thing. That it's a very powerful thing to understand what you actually want so that you know what to ask for, which especially if you are marginalized in any way is often taken away from you, which is again very similar to what Florence Given argues in her book, but I found that Audre Lorde writes it down in a more succinct way. And because I reread that, I decided to read another essay from this essay collection. And I read, I think one of her most famous one, The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House, which I was actually surprised with how short this essay was. And its basic premise is, well, the Master's tools will never dismantle the Master's house. We can never use patriarchy's tools to reach our feminist goals, which, as she argues, a lot of white women and a lot of upper class women are trying to do. They're trying to work towards a feminist future within the system. But she argues that that is going to cause us to leave behind a lot of women who do need our help. She's basically arguing for intersectionality, understanding that women of different sexualities, different skin colors, trans women, cis women all have different struggles, and we need to be listening to each other. So my camera cut out here, but I was talking about how in the spirit of reading about joy, I reread one of my favorite poems about joy, The Orange by Wendy Cope, which I've spoken about before. And then I found this essay by David Graeber called Dead Zones of the Imagination, which is about a lack of imagination in structures and how violence is kind of ingrained in government structures, corporate structures, etc. He also talks about how we're constantly trying to structure everything and define everything and basically push all the variables of reality into this fixed structure. And if you then don't fit into that anymore, then there will be consequences. I feel like I'm speaking a little bit vaguely right now, and that is honestly because it took me a little while to get through this essay, because David Graeber generally writes in a very accessible way, even for people who have no background in anthropology or social theory. This one, I did feel like I lacked a little bit of background info, but with the right amount of underlining and making notes and Googling things, I did end up understanding it. But clearly, I still do have a hard time reproducing the information. But I would recommend reading this essay if you are interested in basically the pitfalls of bureaucracy and how violence is situated within structures, like structures of companies and governments. And then in the spirit of imagination, I was reminded of a genre that I really love, solarpunk. I mean, I'm constantly recommending to you Becky Chambers books, which could be considered kind of solarpunk. It's like this genre that is very much about like kind of a utopian futuristic society, lots of renewable energy, lots of nature, lots of sun, lots of wind. And apparently a manifesto has been written for this genre, and I decided to read it. If you're interested in writing about this genre yourself, or if you're interested in like thinking about utopian futures, maybe you are a biologist or like a life science technologist, I think reading this manifesto is going to be very interesting. It's super short. It's like a list of 30 rules. Okay, that was the tree that somehow led me from reading a book about ice dancing all the way to reading a manifesto on solarpunk. Also, before we move on to the next tree, I feel like I need to make a little note on the title of this video. I recently made a podcast episode all about new wave of content that is all about stopping doom scrolling, or things I did instead of doom scrolling, essays I read instead of doom scrolling, crafts I did, books I read instead of doom scrolling, vlogs of people going without their phone. And some people really, really love this trend because it helps them get off their phones, and other people have called it kind of hypocritical because you go on the internet to talk about how off the internet you've been. And I just had a little theory that a lot of this instead of doom scrolling content is just regular old lifestyle content, but just with a rebrand, with a little buzzword attached to it. Like, if you think about it, most lifestyle content is people going on the internet to talk about the fun stuff they did off the internet, right? I have been doing these kinds of videos where I talk about the books I've been reading in the past few months for 10 years now. For 10 years, these videos have been a staple on my channel. And I just thought, what if I just add the sentence instead of doom scrolling behind the title? Does it now suddenly seem like this new, interesting, trendy video? Are more people gonna watch it now? Even though it's basically just the same thing that I have been making all this time? I don't know. It's a little tongue-in-cheek. It's a little tongue-in-cheek. Don't take it too seriously. Let's go to the other tree. The tree that I would like to call the tree of fantasy. And that is my journey in reading fantasy books. I mean, this is an ever-growing tree. I'm always reading fantasy books. It started with The Strength of the Few, which I talked about in my last reading wrap-up. And that got me into, you know, the atmosphere to read some epic fantasy. And so I continued my journey into the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings, and I read the second book, The Two Towers. This book is so interestingly structured. It's so different from the movie because we basically just, you know how like most fantasy books, if there are multiple POV, they're constantly switching between chapters. This book is just the entire first half. You just follow Aragorn and Legolas. And then the entire second half, you basically go back in time and just follow everything that Frodo and Sam and Gollum are doing. Which makes it so that this book, and I understand that this is because this book was never 3 books in the first place. It was always kind of just 1 book. But it makes it so that this book doesn't really have like a clear climax of the story or like a thing that it's working towards. Can't really find a 3-act structure in this book because it was never meant to have one, which makes sense. So this book had significantly less lore drops than the first one, and I did kind of miss that. There's more action, there's more war, there's more things going on, but I just want to read about the history of the elves. They also spend a significant amount of time in this book just walking from tower to tower and then walking a bunch of stairs. That being said, I loved it. Again, my favorite part was the Ents, which are kind of like tree shepherds that talk very slowly, that don't hurry, that take their time on things. And that is the kind of lifestyle that I want to live. Then continuing my fantasy journey, I have finally finished the Emily Wilde trilogy. So just to get you back up to speed, I think 2 years ago, I read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Instant 5 stars. The only cozy fantasy book that I truly loved. Such quirky characters, so well written, with a very recognizable voice of our main character, Emily Wilde, who is just this kind of awkward, socially awkward fave researcher. She needs to charm the townsfolk. There is a rivals to lovers storyline. It was awesome. And then I picked up the second book, which according to many is even better than the first book, but I couldn't get through it. And it kind of sat on my shelf for almost a year, but I finished it by listening to the audiobook. I think the reason that I liked this one less is because it's way more plot focused, and we spent a little less time with the fae. It's only towards the end of the book that we do get more fae and fairy creatures, and that's where I started enjoying it again. Most of this book is just solving a mystery, and then the final book almost reminded me of The Cruel Prince, if like The Cruel Prince only had like completely politically inept characters. Like if The Cruel Prince was not a political intrigue book because the characters just don't care about politics or are just really bad at it. And that actually made this book very fun. Really awesome trilogy, but the first one will remain my favorite. Maybe just because it was new and, you know, that made it kind of shiny and exciting. Because the second and the third book is kind of more of the same, which I guess makes sense because that's how you write second and third books. I just get bored easily. And then reading this series got me back into like fairies and folklore and stuff. I was in this really cute store that sells books and crystals and handmade jewelry. And also this book, it is called Forest Fairies, Mushrooms and Goblins. And it is not the type of book that I would usually talk about on this channel because it's a sticker book. It just has a bunch of stickers of fairies and mushrooms and goblins. I really like books like this because I use them for my journal, for my little scrapbooking journal. But unlike most sticker books, it doesn't just contain stickers. It also has quotes and poems. And I found 2 poems that very specifically equate mushrooms with elves, calling mushrooms like the fairies of the forest, including a poem by Emily Dickinson called The Mushroom, where she says the mushroom is the elf of plants. This was a beautiful poem, which has now, you know, we've reached the end of the tree so far, but I would love to keep growing the tree. And I think I want to read more of Emily Dickinson's poems. And I'm really interested in this concept of equating fairies with mushrooms. So that might be something that I want to read more about in the future. But I guess you will see where this tree grows towards in my next wrap-up video. Another tiny tree. This one's truly at its beginning. It's just sprouting. It's a witchy, dark, vibey Florence and the Machine Aurora tree. I was just flipping through this art book that I have about witchcraft. I don't consider myself witchy or spiritual or anything, but I love art about witchcraft and the history of women being accused of witchcraft. I just like to flip through this gorgeous book. It shares this quote that I really liked. The witch cooks love down in a pot. She feeds herself to herself. She grows stronger. Which actually, now that I think about it, also kind of fits with the concept of the book Women Living Deliciously that I read. And this quote, it says, is an excerpt from a poem, Ground Meat, from the book Salt is for Curing by Sonia Vatomsky. And so what did I do? I ordered that book. I was like, Leonie, you never read poetry. You don't understand poetry. You don't know how to read poetry. You are very intimidated by poetry. But that quote, I really liked it. So I just ordered this little poetry book and I really enjoyed it. I just went into it with the vibe of I'm just gonna read it and I'm just gonna let it influence me. As some people who really enjoy poetry have told me, sometimes it's just a vibe. Sometimes you're just gonna have to let it like emotionally touch you. And that's what these poems did. They are very much poems for the people who love dark atmospheric fantasy, okay? If you like Rachel Gillick's books, if you like Ava Reed, if you like Naomi Novak, if you like to listen to Florence and the Machine and Aurora and Hosier, you're gonna love this poetry collection that is full of metaphors about the body and being a woman and having anger. My only critique is that the imagery repeats itself a lot throughout the poetry collection. There are many mentions of ribs and bones and salt and blood and skin and flesh, and I love that, but also it was a lot of the same. That being said, the fact that this book has convinced me that I might actually enjoy poetry makes it deserve 4 stars. Also, I feel like this huge mug that I have with a little moth on it kind of fits the vibe. Let me read to you my favorite poem so you get kind of a sense. This one is called Lappish Hag's Love Potion. Soak in old bathwater and sluice away skin until ribs open up and the heart is expelled like an oyster pearl. That's gorgeous. The imagery of that. Okay, so those were the trees, I guess the 2 big trees and 1 small tree that I've been growing by reading. I love the playfulness of keeping track of how each book leads to the next book that I read. Like, the books that you read are not just solitary things. They're all connected to each other. So I hereby encourage you to draw your own book trees. I would love to see them. And I will continue to share how these trees grow over the year. But I do have 3 other books that I want to share that I'll call little seedlings, as in they are not trees yet. They kind of are just solitary books. First of all, I was in the mood for just like a simple, easy romance book. And so I read The Switch by Beth O'Leary. The concept of this book is awesome. On the one hand, it's your classic story of a workaholic girl that moves from the big city to a small town where her grandmother lives, and there she has to help the townsfolk organize some kind of like festivity, and then she falls in love with, like, you know, a small town boy who makes her see that life is not all about Excel spreadsheets and being on time. That part was a little bit boring, I'm gonna admit. That was a little bit boring. But my favorite part of this book was the other storyline. Remember how I said how the main character moves to her grandmother's house? Yeah, so her grandmother moves to her house. So we have old grandmother going from small town as she has just divorced her scumbag husband, and now she is moving to the big city to live her life and to start dating. Love it. I loved reading a romance book from the perspective of an elderly lady that is just taking this step to, well, I guess, live deliciously as a woman and go out dating and try to restart her life and experience these joys that we often only expect to see from young people, like people in their 20s and maybe 30s, but not after that. So although in the younger woman storyline, I truly did not feel an inch of chemistry and I kind of found those chapters boring, I will still give this book 3 stars purely for having such a fun storyline with the grandma. And I also applaud this book for being something different from pretty much every other romance book by featuring an elderly woman as a main character. The next singular book that I read was James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. This has been on my list to read for such a long time, but recently I was in a bookstore and I was like, let's pick this up and finally read it. And I kind of went into it blind. I only knew that this was going to be a kind of tragic story about a gay relationship. It takes place in 1950s Paris. So as you can imagine, it's going to be a tragic story about a man who is married, but clearly cannot fully come out or accept the fact that he is into men. And he starts this affair with a young bartender, an Italian barman, which is of course doomed to fail as our main character's fiance is going to return to him from her travels at some point. We get to see the beauty of like 1950s Paris. It has also this kind of Oscar Wilde vibe to it as you follow these artists, these free people drinking lots of alcohol and eating oysters. But there's also the tragedy that you mostly see in the small little maid's room that Giovanni lives in and that the two spend a lot of time together. This kind of messy, small room that is kind of closing in on our main character psychologically. To me, the most interesting and also most tragic part of this book was all the self-hatred that is explored here, and a kind of loss of masculinity our main character feels over feeling attracted to a fellow man. Misogyny is even explored in this book. The female fiance that the main character is basically cheating on also gets a role in this book. She also gets to say her part. And last but not least, it's also just beautifully written. If you want a sweaty, clammy Paris novel about a doomed, tragic love triangle, this is the one. And lastly, I finally picked up the book Just Kids by Patti Smith after I have seen people rave about this book for years. I decided to listen to the audiobook because the audiobook is actually narrated by Patti Smith herself, which I love because there are some poems in this book that she narrates herself, so you really get to see her version of the poem. And there are even a few parts where she sings the song lyrics that are written into the book. In Just Kids, we follow the young Patti Smith as she is, developing herself as an artist, as a writer, a poem, and eventually a singer. But it is also very much about her relationship with the artist Robert Mapplethorpe, and their relationship turned friendship, turned relationship, turned friendship. They lived together for a very long time, trying to scrape by, trying to scrape together bits of money so they can do their artist's work. This book throws you back to 60s New York with this bohemian hippie culture, artists. There are so many cameos of famous people from that time, like Andy Warhol or musicians. And Patti Smith's beautiful writing style really makes you feel like you are there. If you like the 60s and 70s, if you like to read a memoir about two artists and how they grew out to be huge artists from their small beginnings to their successes, then you're really gonna like this book. I will say, because I had such hugely high expectations, I was a little bit disappointed because I think I expected maybe a little bit more life-changing life lessons, but instead it is just a beautifully written, tragic but also beautiful memoir of an artist. And I love Patti Smith's music. I am so excited to read, I'm already always, of course, excited to read a book, but I'm extra excited now because I'm ooh, I'm growing my trees. Maybe this book is gonna be the start of a new tree and I don't even know yet where it's gonna go. I wonder what it's gonna look like in a year from now. Very excited about this. I am currently in the middle of, I think, 6 different books. I've been listening to so many audiobooks and not finishing them, so I really need to get on that and actually finish them. I have a 24-hour readathon planned with 2 of my friends soon, so already excited to get a lot of reading in then. I mean, the sun is starting to shine again, spring has sprung, and it's just making me so excited to read on my balcony in the morning while I have morning sunshine. That's one of my favorite things. It's just reading outside in the sun. Yeah, let me know what your favorite book was that you read the past month. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon in another video very soon. Goodbye!